So now we're just going to talk about special circumstances, and first I'm going to talk about babies. So I just sleep with my babies. I nurse on demand. I let them sleep with me. I don't believe this sets them up for bad sleep habits when they're older. I have 3 kids that sleep in their beds through the night, right around 10, 12 hours a night. And so I don't think this is setting them up for anything. I know a lot of people say that it will. The transition for getting them out of my bed is something that I do when we're not sleeping well. And so if either one of us isn't sleeping well because they're in my bed, then eventually they move out, which is usually between age 2 and 4. So anyways, I nurse my babies on demand. I tried going out and doing the whole like nurse them and change their diaper and then put them into bed awake. And it didn't work. I'd always fall asleep on the couch nursing them. So I just kept them in my bed and nursed them there. I did try training both my first and my third child. So my first child, I'm like, oh, I'm going to sleep train them. Like, this sounds very reasonable. They're going to sleep when I tell them they should sleep. And it totally didn't happen. We've already talked about her. She did not sleep. So I threw in the towel with that. I threw in the towel with that in like a week. So that didn't happen. And then my third, I tried sleep training again, like sort of like, cause he's my third, I had to get 2 other kids to 2 different schools when he was born. And I just had a lot going on at the time. And so he did end up like just having to wait. And if I knew he was tired, I would put him down. And it didn't work. Like putting him in his bed, trying to sleep train him, he'd break out in hives, which is that cortisol response that we tried earlier. And so he was like, I could tell that was really hard for him. Like he's having a stress response to having to go to sleep by himself. And so that was something I didn't follow through with. And this is just like my temperament. And so your temperament might be different. I don't mind holding my babies, and I just kind of do that. I realize that the whole baby stage is really temporary, it's fleeting, but your mileage is going to vary. You're gonna have to do what works for your family. So this isn't a judgment, this is just what worked for me. If it's what works for you and you're afraid you're screwing your kid up, you're probably not. So what screws kids up is abusive parents, and you are not an abusive parent from either sleep training or from not sleep training and holding your baby all the time. When a newborn, they can't really grasp that you and them are different. So to them, it's just you are another part, you're an extension of themselves, or they are an extension of you. They haven't developed the mental capacity yet, like the brain just develops, and it hasn't developed this ability to understand yet that they are different than you. So the way that I can tell that my kids are the way I can tell that my kids are starting to separate that I am different than them is when they start telling me no. So I say like, oh no, don't go over there. And they like do the opposite and make a beeline for it. It's like, oh no, you understood what I said. You understand the word no. And that's when I start being okay, like thinking about either getting them out of my bed if I'm not getting good sleep, or sleep, like being a little bit more firm with when they go to sleep or anything like that. So I'll follow the child's lead when they are pretty much operating completely out of instinct. And as they start understanding they're a separate person and their brain is developed into that way, is when I sort of transition into more of a parent-led approach. Which it's really not punitive, it's really just kind of firm boundaries and all that sleep hygiene that we talked about before. Moving on with special circumstances, you might feel like your kid doesn't need sleep, like, oh, they're always hyper, they're always super energetic, like this child only needs 4 hours of sleep. I don't think so. So too little sleep can present as ADHD, like hyperactivity. It doesn't always mean that ADHD is caused by too little sleep. It's so fun trying to figure all this stuff out, isn't it? But it can present as ADHD and hyperactivity, and so the solution is not less sleep. Like some people will think that, like, oh, my kid has way too much energy, I need to not let them sleep as much, so they get tired and maybe they'll mellow out. And the brain can kind of like switch on. It's like the brain can kind of switch, and so it's trying to keep this tired child awake, and that's its coping mechanism, is to give it like way too much adrenaline, give it way too much energy. And so healthy kids that are getting healthy sleep and have good gut health and aren't having underlying neurological conditions should have like a steady, even energy that's not super slapstick, it's not super impulsive. And I'm definitely not an ADHD professional. You'll want to seek professional help with that, but that is just a kind of common misconception that I thought we should cover. Sensory kids might get overstimulated really easily, and we have a whole sensory series, and I'll link down to the starting video of that. So if your kids are really sensitive kids, like they might cry easily, they might complain about itchiness easily, or they might go in the opposite direction and just be constantly like bashing into walls and jumping and talking too loudly and stomping too hard in the house. Those are all sensory kids, and they might get overstimulated. I had this with my daughter that had autism, which again, poor sleep and sensory issues are both common with autism, but they do not always mean that your child has autism. So your child can have sensory issues without autism. And in the case of sensory issues without autism, you may need to reduce their stimulation even more with lots of blinds on the window, like especially if they're overstimulated. Go watch all of my all of my different activity videos for different sensory needs. And so you might need to reduce their stimulation. For my daughter, I knew I needed to be back in the house by 4:30 if I wanted her to go to sleep at 7. So if I stayed out late, even though it wasn't anywhere close to bedtime, even if we were home at 5:30 or 6, that was like, it took her hours to wind down from all that sensory overstimulation because she was perceiving sensory things differently than I was. And so I needed to be home by 4:30 in the afternoon, and really it's still better for her sleeping if I'm home by 6 or like at least an hour or two before bedtime, for her to have time to process all that stimulation. And something that you can do if your child is having a hard time with sensory issues and they're having a hard time processing is you can help them process by playing dollhouse with them and help them kind of reenact different scenarios, and that can kind of slow down their mental chatter enough that they'll be able to go to sleep. And this isn't going to be like, of all the solutions that I've given you, the supplements are going to be the most fast acting, and then sleep hygiene, and then gut health. Gut health is pretty fast. We saw a huge difference in sleep within 3 to 5 days. But then these special circumstances are all kind of long-term plans. So we talked about reducing stimulation for everybody after dinner, like no roughhousing, no going back outside to go ride bikes, trying to move your dinner up closer to bedtime. But then for our sensory kids, that's even more important. And then the last special circumstance is sleeping with the sun. So I told you we live in Montana, and in the wintertime, it's starting to get dark around 4:30. And in the summertime, like our fireworks don't go off at 4th of July until 10:30 because it's not dark until like 10:15. And so that is something that I think biologically we're designed to sleep more when the sun's out. If you're in Arizona, it's a little bit more like mellow and same across the days through the months. But if you're in one of those super northern climates or super southern climates, it's going to be a huge difference for you when the sun is out and when it's not. And so my kids sleep about an hour less during the summertime than they do in the wintertime. And so it's like over the year, it averages out. I think they grow more in the winter too. I think it's just kind of a big rest and digest, hibernation type time. And so they eat, they grow, and they sleep a lot during the summer or during the winter. And so that's something that if you're frustrated because your child is not sleeping and you just can't, no matter what you do, you can't get them to sleep as much in July as they were sleeping in November, it could just be the sun thing, and they might go right back to sleeping a lot next winter as well. And then following that is growth spurts. And so your child might sleep like 14 hours a night during a growth spurt. At least my kids, what they do is they eat a ton. Like they just eat, like my 4-year-old right now, he's eating like 4 bananas a day in addition to all of his meals and asking for seconds in all of his meals. And he'll do that for a couple weeks. And then he goes to sleeping a ton. And so he's sleeping 14 hours a night. Like I put him to bed at 6, he falls right asleep, and then he's sleeping until like 7:30 the next day. That's 13 hours. Anyways, he's sleeping an extra hour during a growth spurt, but that'll only last like maybe 5-10 days. You're not going to like, don't think that, oh, well, he slept 14 hours this night, or he slept 13, 12 hours this night. Your child just might need a little bit less sleep than that on average, but he's sleeping a lot more because he's growing. And then the last thing I want to talk about is melatonin. And let me see, I have it. I do use this for my child that has special needs. She won't sleep without it. I do use it if we're going to be traveling. If we're in a different environment, my kids are overstimulated or like they've been in the car all day, I'll give them just a tiny bit. I give them 0.5 milligram, my normie kids. And that's something that I don't do often. A lot of people aren't comfortable with it at all. Melatonin is a sleep hormone. It is a natural supplement. It's kind of, if you're going to use it, go ahead and do your own research. I feel like if you're using Benadryl every night, or your doctor is prescribing your toddler sleep aids, like what was happening with me, I feel like melatonin is probably a more natural alternative, but this is something you're going to want to do on your own research. So yes, I do use that for my child that has special needs. The alternative is that she is up until 11 when she actually can finally fall asleep, and then she'll sleep through when she's fallen asleep at 11, but she's just so exhausted the next day that it was impeding her ability to form social relationships. It was impeding her ability to learn the next day. And so I started the melatonin. I started getting her on a regular sleep schedule, which this is 5 milligrams. I don't give her 5 milligrams. I give her 2.5. So I just split these in half. And this is something that I'm comfortable doing. For me, I just kind of had to weigh the pros and cons. So I might be messing up her hormones a little bit. They say it's not habit forming, melatonin. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like there's a ton of research about it. If I could get her to sleep with the sleep hygiene, the gut health, and everything else that we talked about, the other supplements that we talked about, which I believe are completely safe, I wouldn't do the melatonin. But since I can't, it's something that works for our family. It might work for you. It's a judgment call. It's something that I would caution against using consistently or using out of convenience. So kind of really focus on getting that sleep hygiene going, the other supplements, see if those work for you, and even get some of the gut health going for sure. So I hope you found that helpful. That's all of my sleep tips. Like you've seen, we went from not sleeping, there was just no sleep happening in my house for anybody because the child was not sleeping, to having 3 good sleepers. I hope that you found some stuff to take away. So go ahead and check out all the links below. I listed a lot of them. I know it's kind of overwhelming. Go ahead and share this with someone else you know that could use some more sleep in their life, and I will see you back soon.